My guest today watched the institution that shaped him get dismantled in real time. And instead of walking away from the industry he loved, he decided to build his own version of it from scratch. Zach Shaw is the founder and editor-in-chief of Forum Media, a next-generation digital media company delivering sharp political and cultural reporting, analysis, and commentary to a national audience. His work has been featured in CNN, Newsweek, USA Today, and The New York Times. Before Forum, he built his career at CBS News Radio, one of the most storied broadcast institutions in American history, before a detour through the PR world. From Washington, D.C., Zach is doing something that most people in his position would consider borderline reckless, building a new media house in the middle of the most turbulent moment in the history of American journalism. In this conversation, we talk about what it felt like to watch CBS News Radio shut down permanently after nearly 100 years on air. We get into the editorial pressures he witnessed from inside a major newsroom, the iterations he went through to create Forum Media, and why he's turned down venture capital to protect something most media companies have already given away, their editorial independence. I'm honored to introduce him both as a founder and a friend. I'm your host, Aishwarya G. Rai, and this is Next Gen Doers. Zach, welcome to Next Gen Doers.
Oh my gosh, Ash, I'm so excited to be here and to join you. Thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure literally is all mine. You were just in LA, right? Recently at the Academy Awards.
Yes,
Was
I
the media
was.
alive?
The media is alive at this point. It may not be well, but it is alive. Stories are being published, cameras are hot. What the world is choosing to do with that information is purely up to the viewer. But yes, the media is alive, but it's not well.
I feel like we're going to talk about that a little bit today.
Yes,
So I'm
most
glad we started
definitely.
on the honest note is what we need over here. But let's start with Time Machine. When you were studying media in college, through to your early career, what did 2019 or 2020 Zach think his career was going to look like?
Honestly, it's borderline devastating to look back at that time versus today because the world just looks so different. But in 2019, I was working at a major national news organization in New York City. I would say I was on the ground floor of like my dream job. And at that time, the industry was very stable. It was still growing. It seemed like there was immense opportunity, especially in the legacy media space. But during the early days of the pandemic, I mean, these organizations were just bludgeoned. Their budgets were massively slashed, and they never recovered post-pandemic. And so going into that time frame, I expected to jump to TV at the national level, continue working in a national newsroom. Because one of the things about like working in the New York area is you kind of jump 8 steps. If you're able to crack into the industry there, no matter what the industry is, whether it's finance, communications, New York is kind of the highest that you can get. And if you're able to crack in at that level that early on, your career is kind of set. So when I lost my job during the pandemic and basically any peer position that I could have, laterally switched to was eliminated as well, I was kind of out of luck. So my 5-year plan that I felt I had was completely gone. I mean, I was on the verge of signing a lease on the Upper East Side. Like I was ready to move to New York immediately after graduation, but then obviously life had other plans. But it's a little numbing to think about what I probably wanted at that time versus where I am today. I can very confidently say I'm in a much better place today than I would have thought I would have been then. I'm just doing my own thing now, which is very empowering and very exciting. But it's crazy because there's that saying where it's like the world you grew up in doesn't exist anymore. And I feel that professionally to a T. I mean, the world that I came up in professionally and you as well, like it's gone. It literally does not exist.
Totally. And I mean the word numbing that you use, that's so relevant in so many circumstances, right? And I can see that in your case as well. And that was part of the reason why Next Gen Doers has come to be because we're in such a transformative time, and there's like this, theory of creative destruction. There's a lot of destruction that's happening.
Mhm.
What do we do with the creativity and like, the skills that we've gained as well? So yes, 2019, 2020 Zach's his vision of the future was might not have come to pass, but you're
Yeah.
doing something to keep that dream alive from what I know. And you mentioned legacy media. Having worked at CBS News, which I'm sure and I know a lot of young journalists would consider the dream, when you were inside the institution, could you see the cracks that we are talking about and will continue to talk about during this conversation? Or did you feel like you had to step outside of that frame to see the picture?
I would say towards the end of my time there, it became very apparent to me. Like any newsroom, there's, gossip. I mean, any workplace for that matter always has like, the gossip of the way things used to be versus where they're going. Um, I would say towards the end of my time there is when I started to see a lot of editorial interference, as I would call it. We started to have to answer to a lot of affiliate stations that were getting very frustrated with coverage of the administration. They wanted stories to be, more diversified, which is, a reasonable request. But around that time, it was the first impeachment of Donald Trump, which is, a globally historic event. And that should be the lead story for every broadcast until that event has concluded. And there were several stations that were very aggravated by that. And they felt that it was aggravating their viewers and offending their viewership base. And so I started to see editors in the newsroom be pressured to drop impeachment as the lead story, move it to the B block or the C block. Those requests were always shot down at the editorial level. I never saw it get to the point where a story was killed or quashed, but it became very apparent that in meetings in the newsroom, it was very clear that like affiliates were getting frustrated. And the problem is like journalism isn't like you can't really cherry pick hard news. You can cherry pick commentary, but that's not what
Mm.
CBS was at the time. So it was kind of disingenuous to try to rearrange the news to meet, a very small listenership base that might be getting frustrated that, maybe possibly the president they elected is facing impeachment. It's still the news. It's still happening. And just because
Right.
you don't want to hear it doesn't mean that other people in the country don't. And so that just, I think, started to alert me a little bit to the shifting ground in the industry.
Mm.
Um, because the other thing too that was I think I had heard about for so long, that predates a lot of, I would say this tidal wave reaching broadcast news is, venture capitalists buying up newspapers across the United States and then gutting their newsrooms, firing opinion writers, and just leaving them a bare bones staff of what they used to be. That was something I saw growing up in St. Louis. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch, which was like the paper of record for the central US, they were purchased by a venture capitalist group that completely gutted their newsroom to the point where like the paper is like non-functional today. There's another major metropolitan area, I believe it's Pittsburgh, where their major paper of record has completely gone out of business. It's not around anymore. I believe it stops publication in May of 2026, or maybe it's already out of circulation. But I knew that was happening coming into this industry. But I think for the longest time, I held the perspective that, like, broadcast news organizations generally are owned by massive media conglomerates, and their news divisions are their flagship enterprise. That in more ways than one has actually been the demise of a lot of these organizations today. So it's kind of something that I believed that was going to protect these newsrooms, like, actually wound up killing a lot of them.
That's heartbreaking, and I think, the thing that catches me the most, and we won't go into this too deeply because of the nature of the conversation, but, like, thinking about local news, for instance, like, we
Mhm.
rely on local news to build the masses, if you will.
Yeah.
But a bit of a relevant bit. A couple weeks ago, CBS News Radio, which is the division that you were part of
Mhm.
specifically, announced that it's shutting down permanently. And I know that a lot of the coverage of this has been, nearly 100 years on air, gone, and that is a big deal. And I wish I could say that I'm shocked, but given some other moves and editorial interference being the terminology that we'll use today, I'm not that shocked right now.
No,
Um,
not at all.
yeah. And looking at the bigger picture, heartbreakingly, I find that the funding argument is also hard to believe. Just tell us, how did that land for you?
You know, I was like anyone I think that had the privilege of working at the radio desk at CBS. I don't want to say anybody was surprised. That unit had been degraded to a point of non-existence a few years ago, but it still existed. It was still putting out hourly broadcasts that you would hear not only across the United States but across the world. And I think when I read about it first, because I read it in Variety, minutes after that decision was announced, it got punched. I mean, it truly devastating in the sense of personally, selfishly, that is where I found like my inspiration to work in this industry and really commit myself to it. I feel like any position or career I've held since then, I measure against it. All of them fall short. Um,
Mm.
so, in the selfish sense, it was very heartbreaking, devastating because I don't wanna say I always longed to go back there, because I knew it really wasn't probably gonna be possible, but it was very much an environment that shaped me deeply. It would be kind of be akin to, like, your school closing, like, a place that you learned a lot about
Wow.
yourself closing, and
Yeah.
so, selfishly, that's very devastating. Professionally, it's appalling. I think the most disgraceful aspect of it is CBS News Radio, like, the financials of it are really unclear. I think that's something that if you weren't in the room, you probably wouldn't know. But from what has come out in broad levels of reporting, it was break even. Generally in the news space, being break even is not the best, but you can still keep the lights on. News is not
Mm.
always going to be profitable. So their decision to shutter it is more of a message than a business decision. And this is like a much broader conversation about what's going on at CBS and at a few other organizations in general. But I mean, it's a complete disregard for history. CBS News Radio was one of, if not the first global news radio organization. Those broadcasts originated from the rooftops of London during the Blitzkrieg. It was Edward R. Murrow telling the American audience about what war looked like in the 20th century and what, at the time,
Wow.
could have come to the United States. Thankfully, it didn't. But the amount of history that existed within that institution for it to just be like lights out is just an incredible affront to the hundreds, if not thousands, of journalists who had the privilege of working there, their editors, their news associates. I mean, it's just horrendous. And I think it's a complete loss for not just journalism as a whole and broadcasting, but it's a huge loss for the American public and also for the broader world that was able to hear that news over the airwaves. It's just incredibly disappointing, but again, not surprising.
Yeah. And coming back to, the reason that I really wanted you on this podcast, you're building Forum Media right now. You were in the PR space in between
Yes.
CBS News and where you are now.
Hmm.
That's been an interesting zigzag, but you are walking into, forgive the terminology, but into the crumbling house
Yeah.
right now.
Hmm.
Um,
Putting
and
up
you're
a
setting
house
up.
in Rome as it burns.
Truly, better
Yeah.
way to put it, exactly. As someone who loves journalists, who loves journalism, I think it's bloody brave. I think that there are people out there who would be looking at you and wondering, "Why not a nice PR job, though?" You
Right.
know?
Mhm.
I mean, tell me firstly, do you feel validated in creating Forum Media and building that right now? And then why are you heading towards that,
Yeah.
given the industries that you've been a part of?
Mhm. It honestly comes back to something I had said earlier, where I really found myself in the news world as like operating at my highest potential, if that makes sense. And when I left news in 2020 and switched to PR and moved to Chicago, the pay was much nicer. The lifestyle was excellent. Don't get me wrong. It can be very cushy. Um, but I wasn't happy. did not at all feel fulfilled, and it was the flip side of what I had been doing all along, and so it I no longer, like, spoke the language professionally, and that really bothered me. But I was
Mm.
able to find a lot of career success in that space long term, and so it made sense for the time, but I would say about 3 years ago is when I really started seriously considering coming back to the news media world in a very permanent sense. And so I had engaged in maybe hundreds of conversations with people, not only that I previously used to work with, but just generally people in my network about, what is the industry like? If somebody wanted to, boomerang back, what kind of positions should I be looking for? And they would always kind of ask me, like, what do you want to do? Not necessarily what jobs are available. I had always been kind of clear that I wanted to maybe not necessarily do on air work, but I was more interested on the editorial side of things, like, coverage planning, just things that are not
Mhm.
necessarily high level, but like helping chart the course of a news operation, if that makes sense. And,
Absolutely.
I would hear very bluntly, like, you're either never going to get that or those jobs are all gone. You're coming to a dying industry, like, stay where you are. You're basically
Mhm.
where everybody in news wants to be is where, like, you already are. And, okay, great, thank you, but that doesn't satiate, like, my desire to switch spaces with you. And
Right.
so, um, I really started thinking 2 years ago about, like, okay, I'd made the decision that I was going to come back, but again, I was not even sure where to start. So, I started freelance reporting for a few outlets in Chicago. Loved that. It was so much fun, but that wasn't necessarily where I wanted to be because the media market in Chicago is by no means national, and I am just not cut out for local storytelling. I'm just not cut out for it. To each their own. And
At least you know.
exactly. It's kind of like being able to like paint a portrait. Like some people can paint certain things, some people can't paint others. I can't necessarily do local news. Um so I knew that I was gonna have to either come back to, like, New York or go to DC, but again, I was not sure on what terms I was going to do that. So I would say it was after the 2024 election where I made the firm decision that I was like, "I'm actually not going to go back and work at a legacy outlet, I'm going to start my own." And the
Whoa.
reason I decided to do that is because, by this point, like, 2023 through 2025, there was extreme editorial interference across most major news organizations. Um, CBS in the middle of like a major acquisition by Paramount. CNN had switched hands a bunch of times. MSNBC, now MS Now, was being spun off. And so the industry as a whole was in massive flux and there was no there was no landing pad, but I still wanted to come back. So I knew that the only way for me to do that was to chart my own path through that. If there's no seat at the table, I'm going to build my own chair. So
Love it.
um, that's what really inspired me, but it also full circles into like a perspective of the industry. Independent media is booming right now. And it's very much everybody has their own lane. I think that if you want to start an independent news organization, now is the time to do that. Um, the There's a complete turnover in the broader audience right now, where it long used to be a huge sticking point where people, didn't trust the media as a whole, or people stopped consuming, mainstream sources because they quote unquote didn't trust them anymore. And
Mm.
what's so unique about that is like those audiences are now looking elsewhere for their news. You could have a whole conversation about bias, etc. We'll save that for part 2 of this podcast, but
Sure.
those audiences need to go somewhere. And my whole perspective was I think it is immense malpractice to allow, people to switch to getting their news solely from TikTok or going to unaccredited sources or not being clear that the information they're consuming is commentary. I felt like there was just massive flux there. And so for myself, particularly, if I didn't feel like the outlet was being built or created that could, encompass as many of these different perspectives as possible, then I was going to have to build it myself, if that makes sense. And so the reason I've decided to build my foundation in Rome as it's burned to the ground, I can hear Nero playing his fiddle. Um, is, even though Rome may burn to the ground, the city is eternal. It's always going to be here. And so in this transitory space, I think there's no better time to jump back in with intention and with
Mm.
purpose than right now. I think it takes somebody or a community of people rather who understand the power that exists within the media industry as a whole. And
Mm.
you have to recognize the danger that is posed by letting that power be seized by corporate greed. Because at the
Right.
end of the day, then you're no longer getting information, you're getting talking points. And I think that is what primarily drives me is like, if this industry is, if like the enemy is at the gates and that's like, corporate billionaires and venture capitalists, you're going to have to kick my door down to get me out of here. And so,
I love it.
um, that's my broad general perspective on like where that industry is at and where we're going.
That's so powerful, and I must say you kinda ate with the Rome analogy.
It's true. It's
It's
very true.
it really is, and I think that's a really fresh perspective because sometimes I get worried as a news consumer that with the breakdown of legacy news and, this fractionalization with, newsfluencers, if you will, and journalists even who have now moved to, more analysis online through social media, but then also independent media houses, that there's a risk of, well, is there going to be siloing that happens? But I think
Mhm.
with what I've seen at least with, foreign media. I love the perspectives I get from it. But anyways, bias, that's my bias.
Mhm.
I wanna know a bit more about this building for foreign media
Yeah.
because it didn't come out of nowhere, as we have well established right
Yeah.
now. You ran 16 iterations, I think, before it came to
Yes.
be what it is now,
Mhm.
and I
Yes.
absolutely love that detail because what a great number to show us this doesn't just happen from, one send.
Mhm.
So you were doing it under pseudonyms, tracking
Yes.
the search engine optimization or SEO
Mhm.
and testing audience responses. And I keep picturing someone in this like cloak of invisibility quietly building an independent media company. Please walk us through what that phase actually looked like.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things when I decided, like, this is what I'm doing, you're kind of looking out at an abyss. There's this article in The Nation that was titled, like, How to Start Your Own News Organization. And it said 8 times in it, please don't do this. You're going, like, don't turn around, don't do it. And I was like, "Okay, whatever, I don't care." But I still had to figure out, like, "Okay, what is my mission? What is my brand identity? What am I going to write for? Do I even wanna do writing? Do I wanna do audio
Mm,
visual?" Because one of the things that, you and I had talked about is, like, I am not a writer by trade. That is not something that I
mm,
actually enjoyed doing. I love audio visual media. And so I had to really determine, like, do I wanna do, like, a YouTube channel? Like, what is the path forward here? And so I made the decision that, okay, right now, the vast majority of the media that I am consuming is digital written media. Um, I had found myself like really unable to like sit through a full newsfluencer YouTube video because I would catch myself
mm,
disagreeing with them. And so what I started to do was actually try out a variety of host suites because at first I was like, I could build a website, all of that. I could go on Substack, but at the very minimum, I wanted to make sure that I was going to be like an expert and very fluent in whatever suite that I used. The 16 iterations we discussed were literally various names. I wanted to see what the naming would look like on a masthead, played with different branding ideas, different logos. And what I would do is like, I would write what I was thinking for the day. So just basically like an opinion piece. And I would upload it to, this pseudonym site and then I would sit there for like an hour and a half and look at it and be like, okay, if I was the average consumer, would I read this? Would I
mm.
pay for this? Would I subscribe to this? And for the first 16 times, I was like, no, I wouldn't. This is
Wow.
not something that I would pay for. And I think, each time I mentally would say no to myself, I didn't see it as like a point of defeat. It was very much like okay, on to the next, back to the drawing board. And I was blessed with the time to do that. I had a long runway to like really refine that idea and that vision. And I think being patient with myself was the most important thing because where so many independent newsrooms fail is they launch too quickly. If they get a massive influx of cash, they burn it quickly, and then there's
Mm.
no product. There's nothing to entice a consumer to actually pay for your media, donate to support it. Like it is a business at the end of the day. And so for myself, I really had to make sure that, like, the product was there and the product was able to be refined to a place where, like, I would actually pay for this. So, it was like, probably December 2024 when I finally locked in on, like, Forum Media as the name, and I had hired a brand designer to develop, a logo for me. The first logo was I actually found out it was AI generated, and, I got my money
Oh,
back for it. It was not
nice.
yeah, it was not what I paid for. So, like, even then, it's like when you're starting out, like, you have to be aware of people who may take advantage of you. But I finally found the correct voice. I found the host suite that I liked. Um, and it just fell into place from there because once I found a place that was like truly my sandbox, and I was like, this is great. I can actually show this to people that I care about. So then I just kind of soft launched it with not only like my close friends, but people in the network to be like, okay, here's what I've been writing. Let me know what you think. I'm open for feedback. And
Wow.
people really liked it. So there are several different products that exist under it. And it's been very exciting to see just how people latch on to it. Like there's also like a trust there. So I would just say the most important gift that I gave myself throughout all of that was patience. Now we're in a little bit of an impatient period because now we're in like, the funding phase of all of that. And that is,
Yeah.
scrappy, a lot of meetings, hundreds of calls, but really making sure that the brand identity was there, I think is the most important thing. I forget what the other outlet that launched around the same time was. I think it's called The Argument. They had to completely scrap their logo and their brand identity on the second day of operation because it got so much backlash. What they have now is perfect
Whoa.
and it looks great. But yeah, they had to change their coloring. It was I felt very badly. But that's the thing is like when you don't actually test these things with an audience and like get their feedback, you do risk launching in a massive scale and then having it you have to
Mm.
start over. And then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, now you already have like publicly documented failure. And that's not great. Yeah.
Right. And I think one thing that we on this podcast keep coming back to is failure is not the worst thing in the world, but I think in
Hmm.
the world that you're working in specifically where it's, there's trust. When you're
Hmm.
people want a sense of trust and reliability, you do want to make sure that what you put out there resonates
Hmm.
because we do have more fussy news readers now than probably ever before. I,
Yeah.
I feel at least. I mean, because the truth has become so questionable, anyways. Like, you just want to create minimal friction.
Yeah.
And what I see from what you did with those iterations was you minimize the friction before getting to the
Hmm.
good bits, which is the
Yeah.
writing and the information and the analysis and reporting.
Yeah.
So that does make a lot of sense. But even through all of this, and I do love the tenacity with which you've approached the build stage, but were there ever any moments where you genuinely questioned whether it was going to work? Either reading that article in the Nation that you mentioned, or
Hmm.
while going through those 16 iterations, were there ever any doubts?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Because I think the entire time that I was doing this, you do have to ask yourself, is it worth it?
Mm,
I had already left my PR job and I did not renew my freelance reporting contract. I was on my own. I
mhm.
fully locked in and was like, this is what I am doing. There, the room for failure for me was financial ruin, like, genuinely, or I was gonna have to, like, go back to, like, a PR job with, like, my tail between my legs. I mean, it was very much like the PR world in the sense of, like, agency life is very unforgiving, and part of, where I was asking myself, like, "Is this worth it?" was primarily the storytelling that existed on, like, the agency side of this business was very disheartening to me as, like, a former journalist because it was all about getting things placed and not actually developing narratives and stories, like, for your clients. It
Mm.
was it was very different, and I wasn't used to that, and it's why, like, the agency side of, like, the communications business was not a fit for me. Other sides, yes, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, you have to ask yourself, like, is this worth it at the end of the day? And more than anything, am I cut out for this? I mean, the imposter syndrome is debilitating at times. Like, what qualifications do I have to say any of these things, do any of these things? And like the answer is, like, some of us may not ever be able to convince ourselves that we have the qualifications for it. And so I just kind of had to, like, surrender myself to, like, sometimes that, like, I'm gonna sit here and look at my laptop and, like, get on some of these meetings, and I am not gonna believe a damn word of what I'm saying. But I have to trust and understand that, like, this is what I want to do and this is what I'm meant to do. And
Yeah.
when you look at it from that perspective, it kind of always is worth it. So, like, those
Mm.
feelings of doubt and those feelings of failure, they don't go away. They just sit with you, and you kinda just have to always have them be around, but it's when they start to really inhibit what you want to do, or you feel
Mm.
like your fear of that is going to stop you from taking a risk, that's when it's a little too much. And so I
Right.
would also be totally lying to you if I said that, like, I didn't actually find myself in those situations. But I found that it was better to always try and do something. And, like, if it doesn't work out, at the very least tried it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you were saying reminds me of, a previous chat I've had on this podcast about audacity and the idea that audacity needs to be democratized and
Yeah.
not just for, the few who have been told that they are meant to be doing things like this, and the question of
Mhm.
who am I to be the one to do this? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. I mean, you have a lot of experience, but I understand when you're, as we've used the analogy, going to a burning throne, like
Yeah.
it's a pretty daunting image to have in one's mind. But moving to a bit of a sunnier image in building for media, there was a moment when you went from, I think, 250 subscribers to several thousand in the
Mhm.
span of 48 hours, I think,
Yeah.
off one post going
Yeah.
viral. What was that like to experience in real time?
It was very empowering to say the least,
Yeah.
empowering and then validating, and then I felt very vindicated. So the
Mm.
post in general was actually a response to The Atlantic when they came out with the Signal Chat story. They put it behind a paywall. That is absolutely unacceptable from an editorial perspective for me. Like, you cannot put a story of the national interest behind a paywall. That is robbing people of information.
Mm.
So from the forum account, like, we responded and quote tweeted and basically said, like, we would never put critical information like this behind a paywall. And by the way, if you want to support an independent news organization that would never do this, you can subscribe here. I just
Gorgeous.
I don't even wanna say that that was a throwaway post. Like, it was just, like, it pissed me off in the moment. I talked to the few of the people that were working with me, and I was like, "I think we should put this statement out," and we did. Not even 48 hours later, I looked at our subscriber count, and I saw a comma in it. I was like, is that so it completely exploded, and, those people are all still subscribed to this day, and so but what it showed me is that there is a demanding appetite for, organizations that will take a stand on things like that.
Mm.
That hunger is real, and also, it wasn't just like a click here to subscribe. Like, my subscription form was a little cumbersome. It was first, last name, and email. It was not just like scan this QR code. I mean, it was these people, like, actually went through the motions and did it.
Steps.
And, the open rate for the newsletter at the time, stayed within 60 to 70%, which was
Amazing.
very good. So it just goes to show that, like, there is an active, engaged audience out there. When people that are in charge of legacy institutions today say things like, we're seeing dwindling audience numbers or like audiences are tuned out, that is not true at all. You need to find a way to reach them and meet them where they are. Barry Weiss, who has taken over CBS News and according to all accounts is, running it into the ground, believes that, in order to meet the audience where it is, she has to pivot a neutral network hard to the right. And if she's learned any lesson, CBS's viewership is down immensely. The evening news has the lowest amount of viewers, I believe, in the last like 10 years. Um, and it just goes to show, like, if you alienate your audience, they will not come back and they lose trust in you. And so it's a very fine line of where when you are in charge of an organization, you also have to be very clear about where your
Mm,
organization stands. What are your editorial standards? Like, if you're not able to toe that line and be clear with your audience about like what it is that you are going to cover and what your analysis is going to be, it's not that they're going to look elsewhere. They're going to tune you out. And I think
right.
also a lot of legacy organizations have really had to learn that the hard way is that it's not that their audiences are looking elsewhere. They are tuning them out and they're not coming back. And that is the kiss of death for a lot of outlets is that once your audience is gone, um, you can't put a pretty face on the screen and tell them to come back. They already don't trust
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. And I think part of the beauty of what you're doing is you're reading the signals as they come through. So when you were mentioning having a sense of imposter syndrome, part of the beauty of what you're bringing in is like a fresh set of eyes and actually reading the writing on the wall, which the Barry Wises of the industry right now might be relying on how things used to be slash how they thought they would remain.
Yeah.
Um, and part of the beauty of doing in this circumstance right now at your stage is there's a level of gutsiness of saying that this is not how things used to be, but this is kind of where I think things are moving. And we need to trust that right now. And we need
Yeah.
to listen to people. And people still want to be informed. And I think that's very, very cool. But we're going to switch to a quick, small segment that you're going to be our debut
I'm
participants
so
for.
excited.
Okay. It's called Still Figuring It Out. What is something that you are actively, maybe even embarrassingly, still figuring out?
Great question. I don't want to say the term everything because that's so broad, but it is everything. I mean, everything about starting your own business and like charting it forward, you will always have to be figuring it out. Nobody's going to
Mm,
have all the answers, and anyone that says that they do is lying to you. I think right now the most pressing thing that I'm trying to figure out is scaling. I think that is the most difficult thing that any organization in its infancy really has to struggle with. And something that you and I have discussed previously is like, I have many more products creatively that I would love to launch, but and many of them are finalized and ready to be seen by the world. But it's kind of this fear, like I talked about earlier, of like, well, I don't think it's the right time, or I need a little bit more funding to make sure that like that is where it needs to be. And I think what I'm really trying to figure out right now is like, boom, it's time. Like really saying yes when it's ready to say, like there will never be a perfect time. Does that make sense? Like I need to
yeah.
learn to say yes to certain things. But outside of that, I mean, I will never claim to be an expert in this world. I'm always going to be trying to figure everything out at the same time. That sounds like such a cop out answer, but everything. I feel like
No.
that's what I'm always trying to figure out, and each day as it comes.
No, that's brilliant. And I mean, I kind of want to leave it there, but it's not a cop out answer because, when people are doing things and building things, I think the outsiders will think that you have everything figured out. Like, you must.
Absolutely,
Surely you have the
and I do
confidence.
not. I do not.
And I think what I love nothing more than to hear is when, guests on this podcast are honest and saying that this stuff is hard, you know?
Yeah,
So thank you for your candor. I
absolutely.
want to like to zoom out for a second. There's no shortage of great, committed journalists, that will go to extraordinary lengths to tell a good story, a real story.
Mhm.
But there, we've been talking about this entire conversation. There's a capture that's happening at a lot of the top legacy institutions, and I don't need to name names. We already have, for that matter.
Yes.
A Washington D.C. headquartered institution comes to mind, but
Yes.
I would love to hear, in your terms, where does foreign media fit inside this tension right now? Like, if you were to just make it very clear, where does it fit in?
I would say that foreign media doesn't fit in. I would say that independent, scrappy news and media outlets that are brand new to the scene intentionally do not fit in to any of the legacy mainstream boxes. And I think it is blazing a new trail. And a part of that not only comes from the business model of being digital first, that is why so many legacy outlets struggle financially, is they did not create or complete their digital transformations fast enough. They either relied too much on print, too much on standard cable, that while their audience, started looking to other screens, they didn't move with them. They didn't
Mhm.
follow the eyes. And so I think specifically being in the DC media market, this really is kind of the center of the universe right now, primarily due to who's in office here in the United States. It's just the center of global power. Um,
Yeah.
I think so many organizations, both traditional and non-traditional, um, are I don't use the term struggling, but I think it's a challenge to find your footing. Um, it's all about tone and it's all about how you approach this media environment. I would say that our organization is taking a very non-traditional approach. I think it also just comes down to like there are still parts of our various projects that are still in refinement. And that's the honest truth of it. And there are other independent organizations that are like, we're doing it. We're out in these streets and we're getting our scoops and we're doing our stories. And that's great and that's amazing. But then it's like, okay, in 3.5 years, if there is a change in administration and the temperature cools here in Washington, God willing it does, is your organization going to be able to survive without this extremely tumultuous media environment? Some may not,
Right.
some will.
Right.
So it kind of comes down to really making sure that like the investments you make in your organization now, not only in like what you offer journalistically and from a place of analysis is something that can evolve and grow over time, but that it's meeting the moment for what it is. So I would just say that foreign media exists in its own lane, and it's very non-traditional. But most independent and new media organizations here in the Beltway, they're all in their own lane, and that's why I kind of said earlier, like if this is something that you want to do, if you want to start your own, more power to you. Like absolutely. I don't believe in peak saturation. I think that humans are storytellers and we're always going to be invested in learning more about the world. Creatively, we are not at peak saturation. I literally don't think that's possible. So I think more than anything, I want people in this creative space to feel empowered to not only like create your own company, that can be really frightening, but if you want to create your own outlet, your own blog, your own news site, your own podcast, you should do it. There's no better time like the present, especially like as I've said probably like 14 times in this podcast. Rome is burning. There is no better time like the present to there's going to be really cheap real estate in Rome, I'm hearing. It's kinda like if you wanna do this, now is the time. There's no better time like now.
My gosh, I dig it so much. Okay, I wanna quickly touch on the PR detour, if you will. I
Yes,
consider it a
absolutely.
detour.
Mhm.
I also have a saying my granddad told me, and it stuck with me, that no work that you will ever do will go to waste, in the sense that it will feed forward in some
Yeah.
beautiful way. What would you say were the lessons, good and bad, or,
Mhm.
neither, maybe just pure lessons that you took from that time? And are you grateful that it happened?
Yeah, and I think there's a key differentiation to make here when talking about like PR as a whole. For myself, it's like there are two worlds to it. There's, the PR agency, which is all about getting placements. And then, there are the marketers and the communicators. The marketers
Mhm.
and the communicators are the saints of the industry. They do incredible work. They actually craft the messages. And I've done a lot of that work and still do that work to this day. And I absolutely adore it and I love it. The flip side, which is the agency side of life, is excruciatingly challenging, I think, to enter from being a principled journalist working in a news
Mm,
organization. I would say that that detour started purely based off of a dollar sign amount that I was given. I was
fair.
enticed by an offer and I jumped ship. And, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like I really struggled my first year in the PR agency side of things. I really struggled. I did not understand like the motivation behind the work. Um,
Mm,
I did not find that the pitches I was putting together were meaningful. I think one of the most important things that I was trying to convey to clients is like not everything is newsworthy. Like you can
mm,
actually like introduce your thought leaders to reporters and like foster a relationship and then they'll come to you for like an exclusive or things like that. And I just felt like the agencies that I worked at never centered that perspective, and the media work that they were doing was clickbaity in nature. Like, when I was in Chicago, I found, like, the work that I was doing was not meaningful at all, and I don't wanna say that, like, the clients were bad, like, some of them had amazing stories, but I felt like the execution of the agencies I was at and the tone of voice they were taking was just not good. And I think the other part too is
mm,
like working at a PR agency is not nearly as collaborative as I think people like to think. You do not really get to levy your perspective, especially I felt like coming from the news world and coming with a massive Rolodex of close personal friends who were still in the industry. Um, I never felt like any place I worked in the PR agency side of things like ever leveraged that or ever cared to.
mm.
They wanted to mass pitch, 600 reporters. Like they wanted to send out press releases to thousands of people. And if we got four copy paste articles, that was it. That was the
Got it.
story. And for some people, that is fulfilling work, and I'm happy that you feel that way. It wasn't for me, and so I think that, building that intentional messaging and, like, being very clear about what you're offering reporters and detailing narratives that make sense, can be really fun, engaging work and very fulfilling. I never found my footing with that in PR in Chicago, especially at the
Mm.
big agency level. It was far more corporate than it was creative, and I will long say that I felt very duped by two of the agencies I worked at in Chicago. I really felt duped me,
Well,
into jumping ship and working there because they promised, these environments of like, "We value former reporters, like, we want your insight, like, you'll only be doing media work," and then suddenly I'm staffed on clerical account work. It just kind of,
mm.
that was an environment that didn't work for me as a professional. It works for many other people, and that's great, and I'm not trying to make it seem like, "Oh my gosh, if you work in, like, a corporate PR agency, you're somehow less than me." No, you're actually better than me because you found a way to make that job work. I I could not do it. Um but, yeah, I think that there are some days where I look at the 5.5 years that I was in that industry, as wasted time, and that's, like, really difficult to think about, but I think where I'm
Sure.
at presently is I don't see it that way. I really had to, like, learn very critical professional working skills in those environments because
Mhm.
we're not always going to be doing work that is fulfilling. That's just life, and so, learning to really make the best of those situations when you feel like you're at a dead end it doesn't have to be like, this is the one-way ticket to burnout because that's what can happen in those environments.
Yeah.
If you feel like your job is not fulfilling you, burnout is next. And I think one other thing that I really am very serious about is preventing burnout. I feel like back in 2019 when burnout really started to become like a clerical term that people used all the time, there was it was almost laughed at. Burnout is so serious and
Yeah.
it can derail your entire life. And it's not just laziness, it is a complete shutdown of your brain. I had it very briefly in 2023 and I hated it. Your life shuts down. And
Wow.
that was part of why I have to get out of this, PR agency life. This is not for me. It just wasn't aligning with me professionally. But I think the biggest thing that I tried to take from that experience is I always wanted to impart some knowledge or experience like onto colleagues or coworkers. Like if I could leave 3 or 4 friendly contacts with somebody and be like, hey, like if you ever have a story about this, like go to these people or go to this outlet. Say I sent you, then that was a win. And I did have many great wins in that industry. I was able to get one of my clients a civic holiday in Chicago. Like there were fun wins there.
What?
Yeah, there
Yeah.
April 5th is Giordano's Pizza Day in Chicago, every year in perpetuity. Yep, how
We just
fun.
missed it.
We just missed it. We literally did just miss it. But yeah, there were wins and there were struggles, but it propelled me to get where I am today. And so a lot of the work that
Mhm.
I do today is more rooted in the intention that I felt like I wasn't finding in that part of my life.
Absolutely, and so the reason why I asked that question, I'm so glad you ended with that, is I think for a lot of listeners, a lot of young people out there, they might see that some of the places that they end up not being ideal for what their visions are
Mm.
might feel like they're trapped and
Yeah,
a waste of time, and there is nothing worse than that feeling of time wasted because you
yeah,
cannot get it back.
yeah.
But you can make the most of it and you can leverage it
Mhm.
going forward, and it sounds like that's
Absolutely.
exactly what you did.
Yeah, and I think the other part too is like stagnation was a huge fear of mine because I almost want to say like stagnation is even worse than burnout when you feel like nothing is happening.
Yeah.
Um, I always at the very least tried to make sure that what I was doing was at least nudging other doors or I was trying to find some degree of fulfillment in it. And those exist, but also it's like when you feel the stagnation behind what I would call like a trap that you're in, that's actually a good thing because it means that you understand that you're not in a good spot and that you want to change. Um,
Right.
Now, if you're in that position and you're like, fine, whatever, then that's also fine. That's valid. I'm not gonna take that away from you. But, that's not an environment that I could have ever found myself in. So I
Sure.
think it's important that when you're in those moments where you feel very trapped and very stuck, that you recognize that it's all part of the journey and you can always leave. You can
Yeah.
always leave.
So, Next Gen Doers has a bit of an international audience, and in some parts of the world, freedom of speech is not a given at all. Do you have any advice for young journalists or young people trying to create spaces to surface stories and truth in their communities? And I think you've already touched on it, but like a direct message to them.
Be fearless, and there's no time like the present. I think one of the things that like really bothers me here, like being not only in the United States, but in Washington and in the Western world is, there is this perception that freedom of speech is under attack. It is, but not in the ways that it is in other parts of the world. And so while people here are ringing alarm bells and they should, it's not nearly to the levels of what we see elsewhere throughout the world. But I think the most important thing is that fear can be such a barrier to elevating these stories. Being a journalist and being a reporter and working in media is not a job, it's not a profession, it is a vocation and it's a calling. And if you feel called to be the truth teller in your community, go for it. There is no time like the present. And also there are thousands of resources out there of organizations and NGOs that help protect journalists in countries where freedom of the press is not a given. Those organizations do exist. And a lot of times, if you are going to post like a major story, like they'll send in people to protect you, things of that nature, or they'll help you get your story out of the country to get it published in a foreign paper, things of that nature. So I would say my message to international listeners who want to follow a journey similar to this is go for it. And there's no time like the present, and the world needs your voices.
Oh, that's beautiful. I almost feel silly for switching to a segment right now, called delete or keep, but let's just jump into this one. Okay, so I'm gonna mention a few things, and just without thinking, I want you to tell me if you would delete it or if you would keep it.
Hmm.
24-hour news cycle,
Keep.
Real Housewives of Salt Lake City,
Absolutely keep.
legacy media paywall,
Delete.
handwritten notes,
Keep.
AI editors.
Delete, ban, unplug it,
Ooh,
put salt water
ooh,
in the data center.
my gosh, okay. Um, algorithms deciding what goes viral.
Absolutely not. Delete. Salt water in the data center. No.
Amazing. Okay, and that brings us to the end of that segment. And now, Zach, I would love to hear about what's next for Forum Media, and for
Yeah.
you, if you'd like to share.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think the most exciting part about where we're at with Forum is we're in the scaling process. So, we are looking for additional sources of funding to really make sure that all of the projects that myself and my creative director and various writers have been working on for so long actually find a place to live and can actually take off and be consumed. So stay tuned. There is much to come in the coming months. I think this is going to be a great summer for us. There's a lot in the works. So I would say my main message is stay tuned, because my whole ethos right now is to make sure that like when it's ready, these things will come out and they'll launch. So we're getting very close to that point. So I'd say scaling is what's next, and that is the mountain that I am staring at. But what's next for me? A lot of work travel. A lot of work travel.
May your travels remain uninterrupted. Zach, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your wisdom, your encouragement with us over here at Next Gen Doers.
Absolutely, Ash. It's been a pleasure. It's been so great to catch up with you.
That was Zach Shaw, founder and editor-in-chief of Forum Media, and someone who has chosen, in his own words, to build a house in Rome as it burns. What stayed with me most is something he said about the difference between getting information and getting talking points. That when outside interests take over the newsroom, you don't just lose a media company, you lose a public good. And that the only answer to that for him wasn't to mourn it from the sidelines. It was to build something intentional to fill the gap. I also loved his reframe of the years that felt like lost time, that even the chapters that don't seem to be moving you forward are sharpening your instincts, clarifying your non-negotiables, and teaching you what you can and can't live without in your work. That lesson lives well beyond journalism, and his message to anyone who wants to tell stories, surface truth, or build something in the media space right now is the time. You can find Zach and Forum Media in the show notes. Subscribe to the newsletter, follow on Instagram, and stay tuned for future expansions of Forum Media. If this conversation resonated, share it with someone who needs the reminder that stagnation is a signal, not a life sentence. Until next time, go do something.